glucose is important for making ATP, why all organisms need glucose, and they use that glucose to make ATP, and they use that ATP to do what cells need to do. So let's take a little bit closer look at photosynthesis and review a little bit of it, and just remind ourselves why organisms that do this are called producers, why producers are autotrophs. So the key to being an autotroph is to be able to do photosynthesis. And you know from our discussions in class that photosynthesis takes light energy from the sun most often. And in the leaves of a plant, carbon dioxide is going to be absorbed, oxygen is going to be given off, the sugars are going to be built and stored in the plant itself. This also requires water that comes from the soil. So this whole process of photosynthesis means that these autotrophs, self-energy organisms, don't need to consume sugar. There's no sugar going into the plant. That's not going to be the case with animals. Animals have to get sugar in their diet. So autotrophs do not have to do that. So how do they do that? Plants do have the ability to convert light energy into chemical energy. So there are electrons in the chemicals in the plant leaf called pigments. Chlorophyll was an important one. And those pigments, the electrons in those pigments, absorb light energy. When they absorb that light energy, that causes those electrons to move faster and faster and faster. And eventually, those electrons are going to be going so fast that they fly off the atoms that they started out on. So you make an ion. And then those high energy electrons can be used to do the work of building glucose. That starts out with the light reactions. You remember in the light reaction, water gave chlorophyll, or another pigment, its electron back, and when that happened, the water broke into hydrogens and oxygens, and oxygen was released to the atmosphere. We don't have to review all those details. The details are nice to know. It's important that you learn them, but in this case, we're just looking at why plants are so important in energy transfer and matter transfer in organisms. So the light reactions, light energy is converted directly to chemical energy. In the process, water is broken down and oxygen is released. And that hydrogens and the high energy electrons are then used in the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle makes glucose for us. So we had carbon dioxides come in, combine with Rubisco, break down into two PGA molecules. Those PGA molecules, they skip over it in this diagram, were converted to PGALs, and most of the time those PGALs were recycled. So here we have 5 recycled back to Rubisco. But 1 out of 6 times the PGALs became glucose, made glucose come together. So that was called carbon fixation. That pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. That carbon dioxide then goes through a cycle of intermediates, so it has to go back to where it started, Rubisco, and ultimately makes glucose molecules. So in the light reactions, we broke down water, generated oxygen. In the Calvin cycle, we made glucose, and we also took carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And why is this important? Because plants, producers, autotrophs are going to be the bottom of all food chains. No matter what organism you see in this food web or any other food web you can devise, all the organisms there, from the flowering plant, the lavenders, to the fruit fly, to the wolf, to the eagle, need glucose to make ATP, so that they can do metabolism. Only autotrophs, corn, flowering plant, lavenders, mangoes, can make glucose. They support the rest of the food chain and food web. The only place glucose gets into this system is from these autotrophs, these producers. So autotrophs plants or producers are going to form the base of all food chains. They can produce glucose, and that glucose is needed by organisms to do ATP production. On top of that, photosynthesis also generates oxygen. And we know from past learning, and we'll review it in the next section, that having that oxygen available makes it possible to get the maximum use of glucose. You can make more glucose if you do it in the presence of oxygen. And this is all possible because of photosynthesis. Photo refers to the light, and those are light reactions, water broken down to oxygen. Synthesis refers to building, and that is the building of glucose, which also takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and stores it in glucose molecules, sugar molecules. All right, I'll put up a chalk talk and some formatives tomorrow. Keep up the good work.